Well, greetings and welcome to the 2021 Virtual Data Conference webinar series kickoff. Today is kind of an opportunity for us to achieve a virtual data conference experience and then kick off a series of webinars that we'll talk a little bit about throughout the morning. My name is Dean Folkers. I am the Information Systems Officer at the Nebraska Department of Education, and it is indeed a pleasure to have all of you join us today for the theme of this year's process of renewal and acceleration with data. Ultimately, today, as a part of this series process, we have three main webinars that we're going to be presenting. For those of you that have been a part of the data conference experience in the past, we thought maybe it didn't make quite as much sense to have a day-and-a-half Zoom experience, but rather target and pinpoint, hone in on some key elements of information that are important and relevant, and then ultimately share those in a recorded format so that you have an opportunity to go back, review if you need to. And then as a part of that, we'll have a series of webinars starting in July that will continue on a more of a timely, efficient, and connected cadence as a part of this process moving forward. So the first session you're in right now, is we're going to talk a little bit about how we arrived at the notion of renewal and acceleration with data, give you a glimpse into what we're characterizing as the information, data, and technology roadmap for the department, and then also introduce the concept of the webinar series. We'll take a quick break and then come back for what I know many of you love, and that's to hear Jill Arend share what's coming, what's new and coming for for this upcoming year. She'll also spend a little bit of time talking through the digital equity data and collections work. Then we give like this big hour and 20-minute break for lunch, and then we come back with yet another invigorating and exciting and timely experience by our own Jenny Carter and friends, dealing with some of the year-end reporting, advisor, staff reporting, and other kinds of key informational update pieces as a part of today's series. So let us begin. What a year, right? Thinking back to March 13th of 2020 and what has transpired since that time has actually it's really kind of hard to put into words, because I think we've all experienced in some way, shape, or form what was characterized once as kind of running. Somebody once said, it's easier to run a marathon once than to run it every day. And for some of us, and I'm assuming some of you, it's been feeling like we've been running a marathon since March 13th, 2020. Just the constant flow of new, uncertain information, new tasks, new data, new whatever it is, it just has been constantly flowing. And so we think about that as the context of our experience and sort of what we've been transitioning or going through and transitioning now into the new year. The new year of data, the new year of planning for the future. So I want to share just a little bit about some context pieces, because some of the pieces of the puzzle that are a result of the pandemic COVID-19 experience that we've all experienced in some way, shape, or form this past year have also sort of created opportunities for the future. One of those opportunities is an unprecedented federal investment in education. For those that are familiar, this might be kind of review. For those that are not, or at least kind of heard about different things, I wanted to share these pieces because At the end, you'll start seeing there's going to be a significant impact on data, data use, data collection, data access around all of this. So there were three major acts or bills that were passed that invested in education. The first was the CARES Act, and that one ultimately came right out of the gate and provided some initial access to resources to help support the middle of the pandemic work, the kind of heat of the process. That actually continued through and continues through 2022 as a part of using up those particular resources. And then along came the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, or the CARISA Act. And that ultimately was a larger sum of resources, almost 4 times the amount of resources as the original CARES Act for education. And then most recently is the America Rescue Plan, or the ARP Act. And so each one of these acts provided something known as the Elementary Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, or ESSER. And so there's 3 rounds of ESSER, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3. ESSER 2, the applications I think just closed for school districts in ESSER 3. They're targeting kind of over the next several months, kind of rolling out key information, budgeting, playbooks, and some other kinds of tools to help with that process. But bottom line, you take all of those ESSER resources and Nebraska's estimated amount of additional resources in addition to what we currently use on an annual basis is estimated at around $906 million, or a little over. So with that is a significant opportunity, and with it, as you might suspect, some responsibility. So we in the department, and I know many of you have been sort of asking a bunch of random questions to consider. And I put the little with data because thinking about the theme and the flow through a lot of the conversation today, it's around what data do we need? What is the role and importance of that data? Thinking about the systems and the tools and the resources. Also, you know, there's no free lunch, so to speak. There's always something when provided resources, some expectation. And so what does that look like? What does the accountability, little a, look like for the use of the resources? Flipping that is, how can we also demonstrate the impact that we have with the resources? How can we demonstrate the improvement of learning or the investment of learning? How do we evaluate the effectiveness of the work that we've done, or the implementations, or the tools, or the resources? What should we be investing in? And then there's that always looming question of, okay, so this is limited time money. What happens after 3 years? What is the sustainability strategy? And how could this potential resources be used to transform and change the systemic opportunities for the future? So, and there's a whole bunch more questions, I'm sure, that are popping up and thinking about as a part of this work. So one of the things that the department has created is what we're calling the Nebraska's Framework for School Renewal and Acceleration. The idea behind this framework is to at least kind of create something to connect to, something to think through when planning the use of the resources, as well as futuristically the accountability and or reporting as it relates to those particular resources. And a part of this also was to change a bit of the narrative in Nebraska, because as you know, in that famous you know, Nebraska is not for everyone commercial that came out, you know, as a part of the economic development strategies. Little side note, I just got back from a little hiatus in Colorado in the mountains, and my first sort of out of city or state trip in 16 months. And I was watching a little show, and one of those commercials actually popped up on the local Colorado television station in Denver. Sorry, just popped into my head and thought I'd share as a part of that. But ultimately, the narrative that we're trying to shift is this notion of learning loss to more of unfinished teaching and learning, and this notion from recovery to renewal, and this notion from remediation to acceleration. And part of the reason for that is Nebraska is a little more unique than other states in that we've had school, we've had kids in school, and amazing, heroic efforts have been made by school districts across the state, making sure that the protocols were followed, that the issues were addressed, and that continued to keep kids and teachers and staff engaged in the learning process. So this renewal and acceleration framework comes with 6 key components. The first key component are around systems considerations. And the idea ultimately is that there are some systemic systems and tools and approaches that could in fact be considered for investment over the next 3 years. And so thinking about those systems, of course, along with data systems, other kinds of tools and resources that would be a part of that process. A second key component then is the high quality instructional materials and content. Thinking about what instructional materials are being used and evaluating and using this as a moment in time to leapfrog all of the instructional materials and content to a high quality space. The third key component is around diagnosing unfinished teaching and learning. The idea that learning loss, which is the national sort of piece of the puzzle, implies that there's some kind of something that the students did. They lost their learning somehow. Ultimately, trying to flip the narrative and saying, they may not have had the opportunity to really get the teaching and learning experience. And so how do we diagnose what unfinished teaching and learning would be? And what is the process and tools to help us accomplish that in this work? The fourth component is planning for acceleration, and ultimately thinking about what are the different strategies to assist in recovery of the unfinished learning, as well as the opportunity to think about the systemic pieces around summer school or after school or other kinds of extended learning experiences that can accelerate the learning process. The fifth is ensuring equitable instruction. So again, taking a look at what and how is it that we ensure that instruction is available for all students, including those historically marginalized. And finally, the sixth component is around professional teaching and learning for teachers, or professional learning for teachers and school leaders. Knowing that a lot of these particular pieces of the puzzle, whether it's new high quality instruction materials or some type of new systems consideration, and all of these pieces require continued commitment to professional development. So as a part of this renewal and acceleration framework and those 6 core components, there were identified basically, 4 core actions. The core actions are to anchor the core instruction to the high quality instruction materials and ensure the appropriate supports and interventions. So that's first and foremost the core action. Second is leverage and collect specific data to determine the level of support needed, and in particular students who have been historically marginalized. So again, the data piece, helping us being able to use the data to pinpoint those particular needs, where they are and where they need to potentially go. Third was assess and attend to the whole child needs. So thinking about all of the pieces of the puzzle, including mental health, nutritional needs, and integrating and aligning the academic acceleration pieces and resources that are a part of that process. And fourth then is to utilize community engagement and partnerships as strategies for maximizing every available resource. The point here ultimately is to ensure the community is engaged in this process. And a part of that is helping to ensure and prioritize the work that makes the most sense within each community that has experienced the past year in so many different ways. The other part of that is it helps to ensure pieces of the puzzle from the sustainability perspective moving forward. So that is the renewal and acceleration framework. That will be a key component of the language and the planning and the coordination related to the resources from ESSER over the next several years. And as hopefully you've been able to see, there are a significant number of pieces of the puzzle that require data as a part of that process. So I want to stop there for a second and take a brief moment and transition then to the second part of what I'm going to share with you this morning and determine if there are any questions or comments that might have popped up. It looks like none at this moment. Perfect. So let us transition then to what we're calling the NDE, Information, Data, and Technology Roadmap. So the idea behind a roadmap, as many of you know, and I was thinking about this on my trip here last week, the idea of the old days where I used to take a map and like map out the path and figure out which highway and which place I needed to go. And if I ran into construction, I didn't know sort of the options aside from pulling out the map. And how different the world is today with Google Maps and the opportunity to just reroute things and pick things digitally as we're moving forward. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience. So ultimately, then why set up or why create a roadmap with regard to information, data, and technology? Well, there was a number of pieces of the puzzle that have been occurring. And I'm just going to sort of really at a high level talk about these in a rapid fire, just so you can kind of get the context that there's a whole bunch of things that are just seem to be all disconnected. And a part of the roadmap is to really bring those things together and allow us to prioritize and work through the topics, the initiatives, the projects in a thoughtful, strategic manner so that we can communicate about it, so that we can work efficiently to achieve it instead of trying to accomplish everything all at once, which, you know, as well as I, oftentimes that is not the most effective way about going to accomplish things. So several of the things that influenced the roadmap were first the digital hierarchy of learning needs. And this you may be familiar with, but it came out right kind of late spring last year as a part of our effort of trying to wrap our arms and minds around how is it that we could provide support for the digital learning, and at the time, in most cases, the remote learning experiences that were happening as a part of the process. But it's not just about remote learning, it's really about ensuring that digital learning, the opportunities to engage and use the technology as a part of the teaching and learning experience can be utilized. And through that, we created this hierarchy. So this hierarchy focused on infrastructure at the lowest level, and that's basically broadband, which our schools have nice access to fiber within the schools. But outside of the school building, there's that homework gap. And for years, we've been identifying that this is an issue. And boy, did the light come on and show how much of an issue that was for some of our students that didn't have access when we moved to remote learning. So there's been a lot of efforts and initiatives around creating some supports and tools and resources and investments and partnerships with internet service providers to help mitigate that issue. And that work continues even as we kind of come out of the pandemic experience, because what's good for what would have been great for the remote learning experiences is going to be awesome for the digital learning opportunities and enhancement of the future. The second piece of that hierarchy then were the devices. In thinking about ensuring that all students have an adequate device. The next was around software and thinking about the software that needs to be there and how is it that we can, where it makes sense, provide cost-effective enterprise or statewide kind of buys related to the software, which are in most cases moving to software as a service types of opportunities. The fourth was that digital content piece and the high quality instructional materials. In a lot of cases, the opportunity to take curriculum or the instructional materials that make up the curriculum and put those into a digital frame was not just something simple. It wasn't just about turning them into PDFs and making them electronic. It is really thinking about the quality instructional materials that are designed and enabled for digital learning, both in the classroom as well as outside of the classroom. And then of course, wrapped around all of that is the professional learning to use that software, to use the devices, to ensure the instructional materials are being used. And that's for our staff, our students, our school leaders, our parents, our community folks that are all in part of that process. The other part of the digital, the hierarchy of digital learning needs had these sort of strands around privacy and security. Oftentimes there was, and still continues to be, some important focus that we place on the use of data and the security of that data, as well as the privacy associated with accessing that particular data by the different systems. So that was a big push and continues to be a big push. And in the coming weeks, a modern version, an updated version of that digital hierarchy of needs, including the resources and tools that can be leveraged by districts, will be available and coming out. So in addition, there is a software innovation network. The Software Innovation Network is an innovation project that the Educational Service Unit Coordinating Council is leading. And it's an effort to find more strategic and effective ways for us to identify software needs of districts and schools in Nebraska and determine an efficient way for us to leverage those particular softwares at a statewide level. And whether that's buying, purchasing, negotiating, or it's building the software that's a part of that work, and then supporting and enabling the training and efforts around that. And so that particular software innovation network process is in creation, and we hope in the coming months to be able to sort of test out this network and begin to create a system of supports that will provide significant value-add benefit to districts in the future. Another sort of bubble that was popping up is the newest data visualization and use innovation network. This one is really about a long-standing need that has been by districts, and that's wanting to get access to the data in one spot and to be able to visualize it in ways that helps make it actionable and make sense, that allows for these particular tools and resources to be most effectively used. And so that data visualization and innovation network has just kicked off as a part of this work. There's also been continued efforts around the digital high quality instruction materials work. And we've partnered with a couple of other states to capture and utilize their digitally enabled curriculum, high quality instructional materials that make up the curriculum. And in many ways have created some ways that can be efficiently leveraged by districts, especially through the learning management system and the Canvas consortium that has been created. ESU 2 has been providing tremendous leadership in managing the Canvas consortium for Nebraska. providing a significantly reduced per pupil rate and free onboarding of getting the instance set up. As a part of that particular process, allowing for digital content, the high quality digital content to be in and shared across districts so that not everybody's creating their own content, and leveraging some of the open source content. So all of these are sort of pieces of the puzzle that have continued to be emerging as a part of this work. So in addition, there's some focus on the sort of data and technology system interoperability. This is that sort of elusive kind of goal that continues to become a super high priority. But it's really around, if you think about, okay, so let's say we have a student information system, and we have an assessment system, and we have a learning management system, and we have some other kinds of tools and resources. And none of them seem to want to connect to each other. And when they connect to each other, so that the grades that occur in the learning management system, because of the assessment and quizzes that are there, that tie to the assessment system, that tie then back to the student information system, those then create a seamless interoperable opportunity where it becomes seamless. And that is sort of an effort that is accomplishable. It just requires thoughtful strategic prioritization and an effort of evaluating what are the systems, the processes, the people, and the products that are part of that ecosystem. And so work around that interoperability continues. So also, where are there scale deficiencies? Where it makes sense? What are the sort of priority software tools and resources that we can more collectively as a state leverage a contract or purchase or even potentially build ourselves collectively as a state and support and ongoing maintenance and sustainability? There's a number of modernization approaches, including the use of the cloud-based tools. As many of you have experienced already, there's an accelerating need to collect and consume and use data. Data analytics for real-time information and decisions. So how did they do on the assessments yesterday, and how does that relate to where they should be, and how can I target and personalize the experience in the classroom? All of those particular pieces are becoming more real. There's also a research and decision agenda that's emerging that is helping us prioritize what is the efficacy of some of the best practices and the contributions to the What Works Clearinghouse to help inform the educational process. We've started to move into the GIS mapping tools, and that is a resource. We've engaged in the K-12 Bridge to Broadband project, which is really about connecting internet service providers with schools and households to ensure that that digital homework gap is closed. We've added the notion of the digital equity data collection as a part of the process that has really helped to fuel and pinpoint and position Nebraska to take advantage of some significant resources that are coming from the Federal Communications Commission, the EBB, and a number of other sort of investments in infrastructure around broadband in the education space moving forward. And I could probably spend another 3 or 4 slides on the number of different initiatives that were going and that were happening and that are sort of all going crazy. And this sort of reminds me of my earlier comment about running a marathon every day, because that's what it sort of has been feeling like, is trying to work through all of these moving parts and make sure that things are moving forward collectively and most effectively. So part of the goal was to sort of, okay, take a step back and let's grab all of these things that are happening and let's organize and prioritize and put those in sort of a timeline sequence that allows us to more effectively and efficiently achieve the work that's happening. And so We created what I'm calling 5 buckets to organize the work. And these 5 buckets are about organizational change, operational excellence, education and stakeholder engagement, security and risk management, and financial stewardship. Now, as a part of this emerging roadmap, there are both internal NDE sort of issues that we're including as a part of this, as well as external initiatives and projects. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to talk mainly about the external initiatives and projects, because my guess is folks in the districts aren't all that necessarily interested in the excitement of the internal pieces around how we manage forms and how we are working through our strategies of expense reimbursements and some of those kinds of things that are like embedded within the roadmap priorities, but more interested in things that are going to impact you. And so that's what I want to share with you to kind of give you a glimpse into where and what priority areas are happening as a part of this work. So under the organizational change bucket, communication is one of the key pieces that we will be focusing on, ensuring that there's a more timely and effective mechanism for us to do so. I think many of you are full users of the NDE Bulletin and some of the tools and resources that have been created, but they're also sort of, and those are a lot of times very tactical, task-oriented, but sometimes there's a missing link about where and what is the department thinking and doing. And so there's a part of this that's about us working through a more streamlined and strategic approach for communicating and ensuring access to information when you need it. Collaboration, the coordination and collaboration among and across the entities and organizations as a result of the pandemic has been terrific. At the same time, it's also been crazy because there are so many different moving parts and things change so quickly as a part of this process. And so a key focus on coordinating and collaborating with entities like the Educational Service Unit Coordinating Council, the ESUs, the districts, Network in Nebraska, the professional organizations like NEDA and NADA, and the Distance Learning Association, and all of the different entities that are all working hard to achieve pieces of this puzzle. That is a critical part of ensuring that we are all in sync and continue to move forward as a part of this process. A key part of organizational change bucket is continued targeted focus on training and capacity building, and really thinking about how is it that we can be more intentional and strategic around a sequence of developmental, professional development experiences. One of the tools that has been created as a result of the pandemic is the Professional Learning Network. That is now sort of a Canvas catalog, which basically is a hub for statewide professional learning online opportunities. And so that will be a tool that we'll continue to utilize and build out as a part of this resource, not just for the data and technology resources, but for all aspects of professional learning that we can provide and deliver and support through the online world. In addition, organizational change piece is around formalizing and modernizing the governance. And this includes the data governance, the privacy, the technology, all of those particular pieces of the puzzle. There are a number of resources and tools that exist to help us do that more efficiently, to do that more transparently, and provide an opportunity for us to address aspects of the future. And so that's a part of the roadmap prioritization. So next is related to the operational excellence. This is a bucket that's really about a couple of things. One is, how is it that we can get rid of the administrative and technical debt that exists? And what do I mean by that? And for those of you that are not necessarily familiar, think about something that you do manually right now because it's just something that you had to do at the time to get done. So you have to pull this list of names out of a system. So you have to put it in an Excel spreadsheet. You have to work through it so that you can input it into this particular part of the system. So over time, that worked. I mean, that worked one time to get it done because the time crunch was there. Well, guess what? That little step in the process of getting that data takes a bunch of time, and it has to be recreated manually every time. And so over time, that technical debt eats away at our opportunities to make things better. And so you start adding a little bit more of that debt every time there's another one of those sort of non-automated approaches. And that builds up over time and gets to a place where you're spending most of your time just dealing with the technical and administrative debt, as opposed to identifying the things, building things, creating opportunities, and doing things with the information and data. So it's that premise that this sort of operational excellence, this sort of modernization opportunity is before us and is a part of our work. And it was initially pre-pandemic stimulated by the receipt of a statewide longitudinal data system grant, the SLDS grant. The Department of Education was fortunate to receive it and use those particular resources to help catalyze this modernization process. That includes, but is not limited to, the following on the screen. Migrating to an Azure cloud hosting and some of the services that are tied to it. Working through a rewrite of our NDE portal to ensure it's a more streamlined experience, integrated and connected with identity. The implementation of the Azure Synapse data analytics tool, which will provide significant, exciting, and we believe terrific insights for districts that choose to participate in those particular resources, including elements of a data warehouse that'll be a part of those particular tools and resources. That includes a data lake, which essentially it's not really a lake per se, but it creates an opportunity for us to bring disparate pieces of data together. So things that are structured in a normal, in a database structure, and even some of those things that are not structured, things like survey information or responses or written words or those kinds of things, all of that can go into the data lake that enables the analytics tools and resources to pull different types of data together for providing insights. In addition to our commitment on data quality and the supports that are associated with that. In addition, business process improvement, streamlining the workflows, online management, those particular pieces are critical in the operational excellence space. And so let's move to the third bucket, which is around education and stakeholder experience. And this one has a number of pieces of the puzzle that we're looking to kind of build out, refine, update, upgrade, and connect. And in some cases, potentially no longer do. But this particular focus, the first one, is around data access and use modernization. So we talked a little bit about the operational excellence piece and kind of the back-end infrastructure and sort of data storage and where it's going to be located. The access and use side of it is really about how do we look at the data? How do we use the data in ways that we can more effectively benefit the purposes, whether it's the school improvement process, whether it's the daily teaching and learning process, whatever it may be. The visualizations and access to the tools are an important part of this. This includes revisiting kind of the broader space around the education profile, improvements and enhancements to the advisor dashboard, the upgrading aspect of the data warehouse, some work and expanded work around the Early Childhood Data Explorer. I mentioned the Data Visualization and Use Innovation Network. It'd be a critical piece of input and engagement in some of the tools that are a part of that. We've also been working in the GIS space to continue to enhance that particular work as a part of this puzzle. In addition, the Digital Education Technology Platform, or what I term as interoperability, we have had the opportunity to participate in a national project that was funded by the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Zuckerberg Foundation. And they all sort of came together and said, look, we understand the importance of interoperability. Let's help states and districts work through a process to evaluate where are you on this maturity model toward interoperability, and then how can we help move the needle on that particular maturity model. For those that aren't familiar with maturity models, it's kind of like a rubric. So you rate yourself from 1 that you simply don't do anything in an area, all the way to 5 where you are like an expert model. And so it gives you an opportunity to evaluate, how are you doing on procurement? How are you doing with your vendor relationships? How are you doing with your technology and security? What does your privacy policy look like? All of these particular tools and resources. And so we've been at the department working through the use of this particular maturity model. And I know there's a couple of school districts in Nebraska also that were selected as a part of this to participate. And I'm thinking it's Kearney and Lexington are participating from a school district perspective and providing input and perspectives. Tied to that then is, how is it that we can use this to help us really evaluate or measure the return on learning and the supports that we're providing? And then what are the tools and resources and supports that we can provide without adding more to the list of things to worry about, but rather helping be thoughtful and strategic in the path of moving forward to eliminating that administrative debt, the technical debt, and ensuring the interoperability of the systems and tools that we have moving forward. And finally, in the education and stakeholder experience is related to the Education Policy Research Lab. As a part of that, we are going through a process of updating the NDE research agenda. And we've had a research agenda for a year or two, and it's helped to identify the priorities of the research. But then COVID hit, and poof, there were lots of things that needed to happen a lot faster than a normal kind of research agenda oftentimes supports. And so we're now taking a step back and looking at the great work that was initially done, but at the same time, seeking input and engagement for others to identify the priorities of the research agenda moving forward, so that we can have timely and effective research efforts for education in Nebraska. The other part of this notion of the Education Policy Research Lab is the department can't do it all and districts can't do it all. So let's partner and collaborate to allow us to take advantage of some expertise at the University of Nebraska-Omaha, or the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, or the University of Nebraska-Kearney, or whatever institution. We've also partnered with regional educational laboratories and others that have been a part of this process. And so that's beginning to help form and create an opportunity that helps us explore and utilize most effectively data analytics as a part of that research lab. So the fourth bucket then is the security and risk management. Cybersecurity has never been more important for us collectively to think about, especially in education. I serve as the chair of the National Center for Education Statistics Forum, and we were able to host this summer, or this winter, this spring, it's all one big day, on cybersecurity, we had the Chief Information Security Officer from the U.S. Department of Education share with us some of the challenges, stresses, resources, tools, and he, in fact, may be one of the webinars that we have a chance to share with you here as a part of our series coming up. But one of the key things that he had shared is the fact that not only has the pandemic sort of increased the capacity for cybersecurity and the issues around it, but it's also sort of opened up a door where before K-12, for the most part, was kind of not a target of cybersecurity because it didn't have a lot of money tied to it, immediate money. So, you know, they might focus on higher ed because there's financial aid information and some of those kinds of things that they could get access to. But the target from cybersecurity now, from a K-12 perspective, is it's sort of like this rich resource that's an investment for the future. And so if they can get like some sixth graders' names, those particular people probably don't have a credit rating. They don't have some other kinds of data that's out in the space. And so this is like fresh data for criminals to utilize in creating and accessing accounts and setting up things and stealing money before anyone would ever even know. And so by the time they get to a place where they would be accessing credit and information in the future, their essentially credit rating would already be destroyed because of some of the things that nefarious things that could happen. So I share that with you because it was like this moment of, we really need to ramp up our awareness and commitment to security, data security, especially in Nebraska, through training and identifying supports for risk management. And we need to continue to help provide ways that we can be supportive in efforts around and across the state in that space. And do so in a way that, again, is not an extra burden, but allows us to collectively not all try to have to figure this out on our own, but collectively work collaboratively together to achieve the security and risk management that we need and want. So the final area, which there's not a lot of specific things from an external perspective, but just to be clear, one of the key things is we eliminate administrative and technical debt. That frees up opportunities for us to invest in different and new and improved things. And so establishing actual benchmarks and metrics for improvement is a critical part of this puzzle. Ensuring that we have effective vendor management practices and modernizing sort of our broader business services portfolio are all critical aspects of the work that we need and plan to achieve as a part of this process. So what are the next steps? First and foremost is we began to sort of finalize the prioritization of the roadmap and the tasks and the projects and the initiatives. What we really would love is for active engagement from you all at the district and school level to help us ensure that we are prioritizing the right things, that we are moving on key things first and then ultimately addressing other additional pieces that are a part of that roadmap. So there will be opportunities to provide input and feedback and reactions. What I find oftentimes is what is a priority in one district is absolutely not something that another district wants at all. And so we still value the diversity of perspectives and opinions. Our focus and continued effort is thinking about ensuring equity of access to resources and tools across the state. We have some districts that have the capacity to do anything and everything they want. We have other districts that don't have a significant amount of capacity. And so how is it that we can help ensure that we are creating efficiencies for those that can do everything? And we are also enabling access and resources and tools to those districts that maybe are a bit more challenged and their ability to help support, whether it's hosting a data lake or a data warehouse or accessing data visualization tools or all of those particular pieces. In addition, targeted inputs on the research agenda. I mentioned that we're going through the process of updating that. We'll be targeting some key pieces, key input parts for aspects of what should be some of the research agenda pieces. So finally, I want to, I guess next to finally, so the penultimate sort of experience is that the live webinar series, and our first one is set to begin in July of 2021. We are focused on sort of elements of timely topics. We want these sort of webinars to be informative and engaging. We are going to record them so that if you're not able to hit the live webinar and be a part of the interactive experience, that you still will have an opportunity to get access to the information. And ultimately, we've kind of established a cadence of every 4 to 6 weeks throughout the coming year so that we have kind of consistent touch base and an update of key, timely, and important topics. A lot of these are also tied to potentially some key kind of data due dates or submission time periods that might address some of the challenges and opportunities. Others may, in fact, address some of the things that I talked about with regard to cybersecurity efforts and initiatives. And my guess is there would be some pieces around an update of where we are in the roadmap and where some of the modernization and communication pieces are as a part of this particular puzzle. So the dates, the first one, the next one, or the first one is scheduled for July 14th of 2021 from 9:30 to 11:30 Central Daylight Time. And then you can see they run August, September, October, November, skip December, jump back into January, February, and March. So that is the webinar series experience. Look forward to more information on that. We will continue to seek input of the value so that we can ensure that this isn't sort of one more thing to add to your monthly schedule, but rather something that adds value and provides insights and engagement for your particular needs and aspects. So this is finally. I wanted to share with you a couple of things that you may or may not be aware of, but in the middle of the pandemic around September, October, Dr. Matt Hastings, who was the administrator of the data research and evaluation team, was lured away to become the executive director of the Nebraska State Workforce and Education Reporting System. As many of you know, this has been a long time goal of the department in trying to get the sort of broader P20W longitudinal data system experience started. And so we have, I think, a very solid, robust, and maturing longitudinal data system for K-12. But the post-secondary and workforce pieces of that puzzle now are a big part of what NSERS is focused on. Well, that left a big void. And so in the middle of the pandemic and working through all the craziness, we had some amazing staff step up and do some terrific things. In the meantime, I'm pleased to announce that David Heffley is the administrator for the data research and evaluation, or we're sort of working through a data management and application development office. Jill is the assistant administrator. We're also Ganeshan Kanagarajan. He is going to be the administrator of the information systems and services and has been a key part of the focus of our data quality efforts and the supports that have been happening. We also had some other directors, Hong Wook Soo, who has been working as the director of our research and evaluation staff, and it has been and is leading the elements around updating the research agenda. And then, of course, Abhishek Das, who has been working as our behind the scenes guy, the database architect, and working through from an enterprise perspective a lot of this transformation and modernization. So thank you to those staff for their work and the transitions and continuing to take on new elements of the craziness that's been happening. I also want to spend a little bit of time recognizing a couple of special people. Historically, for those of you that have been at the data conference, we've had an opportunity to have all of the data research and evaluation and the technology services and NDE staff kind of stand up and be recognized. Since we're sort of virtual in our efforts, I still felt this was a key time for us to recognize Ginny Carter, who later this year will be retiring from the department. She has provided 40, almost 40 years right now, but it will be way over 40 by the time she retires of service. And so we recognize her for her amazing talents and contributions to the department and to education and to the data process. I also want to sort of in absentia recognize Sue Ann Witt, who was our E-rate coordinator and worked at the department for over a decade and provided great leadership and supports for a lot of the E-rate work, the digital reimbursement process, but she has retired. And so we are working through the process of replacing her. I also want to do a special call out for Sarah Simonson, who is the administrative assistant, but she's really sort of a key critical aspect of helping move the enterprise of information, data, and technology forward. And really through the whole pandemic and the transition of MAD and all of the other things that have been happening, has just been super amazing. And so we appreciate her. And then finally, the broader sort of DRE staff and the communications office, our technology services office. Amazing, amazing work has been happening over the past years. And so we appreciate this past year, and I look forward to the work that we have ahead. Drew and Jeannie, your help in supporting and getting this data conference, virtual data conference set up and moving and running seamlessly, super appreciated as a part of this puzzle. So with that, I say thank you for your time this morning. We are going to take a break and then come back and we'll get to hear from Jill. And I'm assuming maybe Jill has friends, but maybe not. She will be presenting some of the key information about what's new and what's coming in the next year, as well as some things around the digital equity data. As always, if you have some questions or some follow-up or some ideas, feel free to send me a note and we'll try to respond as quickly as possible. With that, I will say thank you and see if there's any questions that we need to. All right. All right, so we have, let's see, it looks like one question. Who is leading the Data Visualization Innovation Network? And so the key staff at the department is David Heffley. He's kind of the key contact. We have contracted with an organization called Katamba, who have some expertise in kind of project managing as well as data visualization. And so they're helping lead the content professional learning community piece around that network. The second question from Melanie was, what states in Nebraska, what are you partnering with on digital content? So one of our initial outreach was from the state of New Mexico, and they were focused on digitizing the Engage New York and a couple of the high quality instructional materials and putting those into common cartridges so that they could plug and play into Canvas. And so we were working through that, and Corey Eplersman has some interconnectedness to a number of other states that have been collaborating on ways that we could divide and conquer, as opposed to every state creating common cartridge plugins for Canvas as a part of that work. And then Paige, thank you for your shout out to Ginny. Thank you again, Ginny Carter, for all that you have done as a part of this work. So with that, I say thank you. Have a great break, and we'll look forward to seeing you at, I think, 10:45.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a chance to go grab a cup of coffee or something. We are ready to take a look at what is new for the 2021-2022 school year. So we have a number of different items we're going to be going over today. We've got the advisor data changes. And we're going to be going over some different changes to some enrollment codes, exit reasons on special education, absence codes. And then we're also going to be talking about some other enrollment changes, learning modality, which is a new item we're going to be looking at today, this year. Then person ID files, assessment rostering, and finally, student and parent addresses. We'll take an opportunity to do some questions at that point before we then move on into the information on the digital equity data. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to go over first changes, some of the different codes, or sometimes you'll hear us call them descriptors. These are just, the different elements that we collect and what we are collecting. We have made some changes for the 2021-2022 school year. The first one we're going to take a look at is our exit withdraw enrollment codes. We are retiring one code. You've seen this since we were in the NSSRS days. That is the transfer out code. So what we're going to be doing is we are going to be adding multiple different transfer out codes in order to better track where these kids are going. So you'll see we have going out to a public school, a non-public school, an exempt homeschool, another state or country, but then you'll see I bolded there, that's transfer out to a special purpose school. And there's a reason I did that. There's a reason that we're actually adding these additional codes. It is going to help us to better track things like cohort graduation rate, dropouts, but also in particular, it's these special purpose school kids. These kids are frequently systems involved students. They have a lot of problems. We really have a responsibility to these kids to try to make sure we're providing them with all the services that they need. And a lot of these kids are actually special education kids. And what we were finding is that when they were going to these special purpose schools, they're kind of being lost track of, and they some of them weren't continuing to receive the services that they needed. So around this transfer out to the special purpose schools, we are going to be adding some additional reporting requirements for the school districts. If you have a student who goes to a special purpose school, now these are like the YRTC schools and like of those, Geneva North, West Kearney, etc. The districts are going to need, as a district, you're going to need to continue to keep the students in your system as long as the student is still a resident of your district. If they opted into your district, also you'll have to keep them in your system. One of the reasons for this is that there still is this responsibility to provide special education services, and that responsibility still lies with the resident district when they go to the special purpose school, or I should say maintaining the IEP does. I'm not in the special education team. I don't know all the details around that. But I do know that this responsibility is still there and that some of these kids just weren't continuing to receive these services. So here at NDE, we have been actually put together a group across multiple different areas, special education, our Rule 10 group, also from our legal team and the data research and evaluation team. And we've been working on a companion to the Who Reports What document that is going to be specifically around these system involved students. And there'll be much more detailed examples and instructions around what needs to be done for specific examples of what these kids are going through. So you should be seeing that coming out sometime before the new school year starts. We're also going to be providing, again, the additional requirements around what is going to need to be done by the districts that are the resident district or the option in district in order to maintain that student in your system and maintain sending that student to us here at NDE. So look for that information, and we'll be providing additional guidance as the year goes on. One of the next areas that we have made changes to when it comes to the codes is the special education reason exited code. We've added one new code this year. That is going to be around the parent or legal guardian revoked consent for special education services. This is a code only for Part B kids. There already is a code in the Part C kids that handles this kind of information. But around the Part B, we used to include this group of kids in with the SPED 2 return to full-time regular education program. And one thing that we found when the pandemic started, or I should say when the new school year started, there was a drop in our counts of special education kids, and which made, in some ways made sense because there was also a drop in enrollment this year. Some of the kids did go out and go to homeschooling. Some of the kids did go out and maybe go to a non-public school. But we also would expect to see the kids who are receiving special education services to continue being enrolled for that purpose at the district. And some of them were not, and they were given a SPED 02. What we didn't know was whether or not these kids truly no longer needed an IEP, or whether their parents or legal guardians had decided to revoke their consent for SPED services. So this additional information would be helpful for more purposes than just that. So we have added that one additional code. If your student has essentially finished their IEP, no longer needs it, they'll continue to use the SPED 02. But if the parent has revoked their consent, that is when you'll utilize this new code. Also, with all of the changes to the transfer out codes, we have also updated our guidance around the reason exited. If you are familiar with the Data Elements Guide, you know that we have additional guidance in there around what exit or withdrawal codes are appropriate for different special education reason exited codes. So we have made the updates to include those new transfer out codes in that area so that you'll be able to get those lined up. And again, if you don't, you'll be getting additional errors and warnings out in the validation website. One other area that we did make some changes around codes. This is around absence codes. We are going to be collecting additional detail about the reasons for excused and unexcused absences. And you will see that here we are focusing on the absence codes that we utilize in order to make a determination of whether or not the student is absent for our purposes. All of these are still included in absences for when we calculate chronically absent, but we are getting additional detail around the reasons for these absences. One of the areas that we frequently get questions from, particularly from the legislature, is how many of the absences are due to illnesses and medical reasons. And we were never able to give them that information. This will provide us with that additional information. And having this will allow some of our research teams to take a look at this information, to use that for some additional research and analyzing what's going on with some of these kids. You will notice that for both the excused and the unexcused, we do have an other category. So if one of the other categories in the excused absence don't apply, you can use that other. And then under the unexcused, the only thing we have is the student skipping school. Otherwise, you just use the other category. The other absence reasons that we have in there, like tardy, that will remain. However, it's not something that we've ever used for calculating our chronic absenteeism information or for calculating ADA. There is one new residency status code this year. It is 09, ward of the state or court assigned to a group home. This is really aimed at a couple of school districts who have group homes where the student attends the public school. If you're wondering if this code applies to you in any reason, go ahead and contact the help desk. They can answer your questions around this. But like I said, this will have a limited use. And then finally, the other code changes that we're looking at. Calendar event, we're going back to just having instructional day. We don't have the two different ones. We put that into place last year because we were trying to collect information, but the timing of COVID and the pandemic didn't allow us to make a lot of changes to how we were collecting information. So we were trying to get something in there without it being a large change to what the vendors needed to do and hopefully to what the districts needed to do. We have made an additional change, which I'm going to be talking about here in a little bit, which makes it so that we no longer really need this particular set of information. So we have moved back just to instructional day and the calendar event. For crisis event, we are not including a crisis event for COVID-19. However, if another crisis occurs, like a flood or something, districts and SIS vendors will let you know that we do want you to report information around that crisis event, and we'll let you know what the appropriate crisis event code is for that reporting. But we aren't expecting anything around COVID-19. So the next area I'm going to talk about is learning modality. Now, when I say learning modality in this case, what I am referring to is whether or not the students are learning remotely or if they are in person. What we're doing here is really implementing what we wish we could have implemented last year, but we're not able to do because of the timing of everything. And we do recognize that this information would have been a lot more useful last year. However, we are still in the middle of the pandemic. We still may have some times where this information is appropriate for you to be reporting to us. And who knows what's going to happen in the future. This will remain in the system in case additional events occur where this kind of information would be needed by the department. So a little bit about what we're going to be collecting here. So essentially, we are going to need to know any students who are in remote learning for at least in part of their instruction. And if they are in remote learning for at least part of their instruction during the year, they are going to need a record. Students who are full-time in person do not need any sort of records around learning modality. So if you are a district that is going to be full-time in person and never has an instance next year where you end up having to put any kids in remote learning, you would not need to be reporting anything around learning modality. However, if you have any kids who are doing remote learning, and that includes virtual schools, we are going to be requiring this information for 21-22. So a little bit about how we are going to have you report that information to us. And before I get showing you how we're doing this, just let you know, Nebraska has actually worked with other EdFi states in developing this reporting method. This is going to help the vendors implement this, since they'll be able to implement it for multiple states if they are a vendor that's in multiple states. And this also has been discussed and really worked through with more than just Nebraska, trying to figure out how to do this and what is going to be useful to us and also possible to report by the school districts. So when you're reporting kids for learning modality, the first thing you're going to have to do is create what essentially is like a program. Now, currently, when you are doing programs like special education or free and reduced lunch, the program is created for you. You simply add the kids to the program. You have begin dates and end dates, things like that. When it comes to this learning modality, you're actually going to create a program, and you could have more than one program. And I'm saying that in quotes here for a reason, based upon what's going on at your district. So the different programs that you create can have one or both learning modality types. Again, there's no reason to create a program if the learning modality type is only in person. There would need to be at least remote in there, but there can be both remote and in person. I'll show you an example of that. You'll report the time type. And basically, you can report it to us in the percent of time, or in the minutes, or in the number of days that the kids spend in these different modality time types. Our preference would be that you simply report to us in a percent. And so I've noted that here. If you do this, the remote and in-person must add up to 100% though. And then you'll be reporting to us modality time. It is in an integer. So if you report days, you'll report the number of days that they spend. But again, if you report percent, you report a 50-50 or 60-40 or something like that. So one example, and the example I'm showing here is virtual school. That would be the name of your program. You literally can name it anything you want. You're not tied to any of the names that I'm putting here on these examples. This type of learning modality program would be appropriate if you have a virtual school. So if you are a district that has a virtual school, yes, we are asking you to report all of the kids with a program of that looks like this one if they're 100% in person. So the modality type would be remote. The modality time type, we're asking, this particular example, I'm reporting it in percentage, and the modality time would be 100. This would also be appropriate, for example, if you have some kids in remote learning, maybe during next year, some kids need to be isolated and they go for a couple of weeks in remote learning. You would want to create a remote learning program of some sort that looks like this. If those kids during that period of time are going to be fully remote, and report that to us so that we know how much of the school year that child spent in remote learning compared to in-person learning. Now, and this is one thing that I did see happening in some ways during this last school year. The example I'm giving here would be a high school hybrid program where the student attends 2 days in person during the week and then spends 3 days learning remotely during the week. This is where you'll actually would report 2 different modality types in the same program. One modality type would be in person. Again, I'm asking for, or you're reporting percent in this case. And because it's 2 out of 5 days, it'd be 40% in person. And then the remote would be 60%. If you have a program where, say, the student attends 2 days one week and 3 days the next week and goes back and forth like that, you could put 50-50 as the modality time. It doesn't have to be within a week. It's just what's the basic overall intention of that particular program that you're putting in, or modality program that you're putting in, that the student will be in person 50-50, 60-40, whatever it looks like. Again, this would have been much more useful during this current school year, but we don't know what's going to happen next year. And we may still have times where you as a district may need to put certain kids or certain schools into a hybrid program for a while, or a remote program for a while. And we do want that information. We're also going to leave this in place for the future. So if something else comes up, we'll have this in place and we'll be able to start collecting that information again. Once you've created the program or programs, and you can have multiple programs within your district. You may have a remote program for the kids who go 100% remote. And you also may have some sort of hybrid program for kids. You can have more than one. That's one of the advantages of being able to create. You can actually create multiple different programs depending on what's going on at your district. But once you've created the programs, you then obviously need to assign kids to the program appropriately. Any kid that is learning at all in a remote fashion would then need to be assigned to that program. We would want to know the first date that they were in that program. And then if appropriate, we'd want to know the last date that they're in the program. If they stay in the program till the end of the school year, you do not need to put an end date. But if they leave the program, or if they switch learning modality programs during the year, you would need to end date the one and begin date a new one. Again, if they go back to full-time in-person, you do not need to add them to a full-time in-person program. The other thing we are going to be adding some validations around is that these dates do need to be within the enrollment dates for the particular student. So if the student doesn't come to your district until November 1st, their begin date cannot be before November 1st. That just kind of makes sense if you think about it. So that's everything around the learning modality. We will provide some additional guidance in the data elements, as well as putting together some additional guidance and answering questions, obviously, to the help desk as you will begin working on this yourself. Okay. Next item is Person ID. Even though Person ID is not in the advisor ODS system, many of your student information systems do create the Person ID files that you use to upload into the advisor Person ID system. And this is just letting you know that we're no longer going to be accepting the legacy file starting when Person ID opens for the 21-22 school year. So we have had, since we began the advisor Person ID system, we have had a file format that we created for our system. However, we did leave the legacy file format in place to ease the transition into the new unique ID system that we're utilizing now. We are now going to retire that legacy file version. In addition, we are adding 2 new fields to the Person ID file. This is around the preferred first name and the preferred last name. This may be in your system as nickname or other name. One of the reasons for adding this has to do with assessment rostering, which I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. These are not required fields. You do not have to provide them. However, it could also help when it comes to you trying to add a student that you know has been in the system, but you're getting them under a name that you can't find. Well, maybe you're getting them under a new name and their old name was what was submitted to you. Maybe you have a student who is being adopted and the parents want to start using the new name, but they haven't gone through all the official paperwork to get it changed legally yet. Well, this way you can provide the new name in these fields until the paperwork goes through where you can actually update the legal names or the first name and last name in the person ID system. So I mentioned that this is going to be utilized with assessment rostering, and that's the next thing I'm going to start going over. So starting next year, districts will be able to choose to do their NWEA map rostering through the Advisor ODS. And it would replace the need for districts to load files into NWEA. Now, if you're a district that has a system in place like Clever and you like it, you want to continue to use it, you can. That's not a problem. This is really aimed around those districts who don't have a system in place, or the system they have doesn't really work for them, or they want to try utilizing the data that they're already submitting to the Advisor ODS to do their rostering. If you're at all familiar with what's going on in the statewide assessment arena, starting in 21-22, we're going to be doing what's called through year testing. The testing will happen not just in the spring, but my understanding is it happens along with the NWEA map testing. Now, this only applies to the general assessment for grades 3 through 8. This does not apply through to the alternate assessments or to the ACT. But because of this through year testing, we thought it'd be easier if the data could actually come from the Advisor ODS. So we've been working with NWEA to be able to start rostering that information. Two of the areas that were identified by some of the districts that were lacking in the data we already had in Advisor was the preferred first and last name, which we've now added to Person ID, since that's where you load names to us, and the ability to add staff members and connect staff members to students who aren't already the student's teacher. This might be the guidance counselor, a reading teacher. It could even be a coach who maybe wants to be able to see all of the students' assessment results. So what we're doing is we're calling it rostering cohorts, partly because that's the name of the area in the ODS we're loading the data. But essentially, it's intended to allow you to group a group of kids together and assign staff members to be able to view their data in the NWEA portal. If you're not the person who's previously been creating this file to upload to NWEA, you may not be aware that currently when that file is created, the student can be connected to multiple different staff members through that file in order to allow them to see them in the NWEA portal. That's what we're trying to accomplish with this, is allow you to add these different staff members to that student's results from their assessment. Now, we're requiring SIS vendors to implement this, the ability to create these connections. Again, we're not requiring school districts to utilize the Advisor ODS rostering if you already have a roster solution in place. So when you're going through and doing this, basically you'll need to create a unique cohort. There should be some way in the SIS to do this. You will add what staff member or staff members should see this group of kids, and then you'll add that group of kids to it. Remember, the staff members you add will be able to see every single one of the kids in that group. You're going to need a different cohort for each distinct group of students and staff. So if a staff member should not see a particular student, they cannot be in that one cohort. Also, you do not need to create these for teachers that we already are tied to the student through the courses and sections that you submit into the ODS. So that should eliminate the need for most of the cohorts you might have been thinking of. You don't need to do that. We can make that connection via the sections that the students are connected to. But if you aren't already connecting that staff member with that student through courses and sections, they would need one of these unique cohorts. We also don't think we're going to need it for principals and superintendents. I think we're going to be able to make that connection already. And the intention is to have this data flow to NWA on a nightly basis so that anytime that you're ready to do an NWA map testing, the most recent data will be in the system for you to go take a look at. We haven't yet worked out how we're going to allow districts to opt in to doing this. It will be an opt-in feature rather than an opt-out feature, I think. But more information will be coming. If you have more questions around things like the through your assessments that we're going to be doing, or if you're not familiar with the files you've previously uploaded because it was your district or school assessment coordinator doing that, please talk to your district or school assessment coordinator about this. And the next area we're going to talk about then is student and parent addresses. Starting last year, we started requiring this information to be reported. And I want to talk a little bit more about this because we're getting a little bit more detail of what it is that we're needing. So basically for student or parent addresses, and I say it this way because what we really want is the student address. If we don't have a student address, we will start looking at parent addresses for these different uses. But the three uses for the data that we have, the first is to replace the post-school outcomes collection in the portal. And this is for special education students exiting secondary education. Now for the surveys that are going out this summer based upon the 2019-2020 special education students who exited, that information is still being collected in the portal one last year. Starting with the 2020-2021 kids, we are going to pull that data from the ODS. So we need that information in the ODS. And what we need for these kids is their mailing address, and if possible, their email address, but not the school email address that the students have been assigned. Essentially, what we're trying to do is to get this information into the ODS so that you don't have to also complete the post-school outcomes collection in the future. And you won't be able to because we are retiring that collection. We have recently, as in, I think this week, added a new validation to the advisor validation website so that you can actually look at what data we have on these kids and what kids we have on this post-school outcomes list. You will be able to continue updating the mailing addresses and email addresses up until we pull the data next spring by updating it in the 2020-2021 ODS. However, you will not be able to continue updating the exiting data past the fall collection the follow-up collection coming up this fall. But that information is, like I said, that report is out for you to review for next year's post-school outcome survey. This year's post-school outcome survey will still use the collection that's in the portal. Some of the other uses we have for student and parent addresses, Dean touched on some of this in his presentation. One is for the digital equity mapping and for K-12 Bridge to Broadband project. We're utilizing this information to help pinpoint the areas where kids are not able to access or where kids cannot afford to access broadband or internet, and also being able to provide broadband. Nebraska is also part of a pilot project for determining an alternative to using free and reduced lunch eligibility as an indicator for economically disadvantaged. And especially ever since the community eligibility provision started, it's been harder for us to identify what kids are economically disadvantaged through the free reduced lunch indicator. And so we are part of a pilot projects with other states to try to utilize different or alternative means of making these determinations. One of the things that we are including in this is physical addresses for the students and doing some geocoding of those addresses. So we do need physical addresses for both of these purposes. We also are going to be adding some new errors and warnings into the advisor validation if these physical addresses cannot be geocoded. So you will be seeing some of that showing up in the advisor validation system next year. Okay, so I'm going to take a break here to answer any questions that we have. Anna has asked if there's any way the companion document for who reports what can be made available sooner. We are still working on it. I am not yet sure the status of that, and I would have to find out from the person who's writing that document right now what that status is. Obviously, we're going to try to make it available as soon as we can, but we also want to make sure that the answers that we have in there are correct, and we don't want to mislead you on any of that information. But yes, we will try our hardest to get it out there as soon as possible. And also, a report of students currently be reported by special purposes school with the student's resident district will be helpful right now. So districts have an opportunity to verify and update any data in SIS systems. We will make a note of that and see what we can do about that, Anna. We'll follow up with you if we have more questions about that. So Angela said they don't add student personal emails into the student information system. Did I say that student email is optional? Student email is just around the post-school outcomes, these special education kids. It is not required. They would like to have it. Again, it's only on the kids who have exited. I would talk to whoever was completing your post-school outcomes survey or post-school outcome collection in the portal, see whether or not they were providing these email addresses just on these kids. And if they are, maybe you can add them just for those kids to your student information system. And again, only once they've exited, so that we can pull that information just for this purpose. And Anna asked if a student withdraws to attend another Nebraska public school but does not enroll somewhere else, will be a validation error? Yes. There will be new validation errors around these different transfer out codes. Again, we want to be able to track these kids a little bit better. And so you're going to be seeing that happening. Amy was asking if we wanted students' personal email address. Again, I answered that. It's just around the post-school outcomes kids, only once they've exited. And I would also encourage any district to talk to whoever has been completing that survey. Will ethnicity be added to NDE upload to NWEA? If that is in the file format that NWEA wants, yes, that will be added. NWEA is actually going to be coming in. We're going to create a way for them to come in and pull that data out on a nightly basis. However, they will not have access to all the information, only to the information that they need. I will have to double check with them to see if that is one of the elements that we're going to be pushing out to them. What kind of school is a special purpose school? Those are mostly your schools for neglected delinquent youth. West Kearney and Geneva North are a couple of them. And the document will include which schools we are referring to, the systems involved students document that we're creating. And Robin over in SPED did bring up that the email information just helps them to have one more avenue to connect kids and help with district data. So again, it's helpful to be able to get as many of those surveys completed as possible, and having that email address can be helpful for that. Okay, so there are more questions here, but I'm going to need to move on a little bit. So we'll get back to these if we have time at the very end. I do want to move on now to the digital equity and data collection portion. So we started collecting the digital equity data in 2020, 2021. We are going to continue to collect that in 21, 22. That's going to be an ongoing collection. We have been working again with other states on the sets of questions and answers. And because of that, there has been a slight update to the questions and valid responses that are available. It's really no new information. It's just breaking a couple of the questions out into separate questions and also a little more clarification around what we're asking for in those questions. So the first one is internet access and residence. Right now, it has become just a yes or no question. And you can see we have an example of what the question you could be asking to the family on this particular element. There is a document available in the vendor resources site, which I'll point you to toward the end, that has all of these questions and answers also listed. So this is fairly simple. We had this is one of those that we broke out into two separate questions. So the first one's just a yes or no, whether or not they can access the internet. And again, we identify it specifically to their primary place of residence. And the next one is if the answer to that one was no, then it goes on to this question, which is basically asking for the reason or to the barrier to them having this internet access, whether it's not available, not affordable, or any other reason that they may give for that. This question we previously asked, we've modified the list of responses a little bit. So what is the primary type of internet service used in the student's primary place of residence? And I think there's, like I said, there's been some changes. I think this community provided Wi-Fi is a new element here. Otherwise, there has been a lot of change to that question. Again, focusing on the primary type of internet and the primary place of residence. We are expecting only one answer for this. What's the internet performance like? And we got more detail here because we're specifically wanting to know whether or not they can do the video streaming and the assignment upload. Essentially, would it allow them to be in remote learning without interruptions? And three answers here. There are some additional details. I don't necessarily be able to read this whole thing now. Again, this information is available and we'll make sure you're able to get to these questions and answers. But we do have some detail around what yes, sometimes, or no would mean on the internet performance and residence question. Primary learning device when away from school. We kind of clarified this a little bit. We don't necessarily need what their primary learning device is at school, but when they're away from school, what device are they going to be using? Who is the provider of their primary learning device? So personal, that would be, it is within the family, essentially. Obviously, school is if the school is providing it. Other, that might occur if, say, there's a community program that provides devices to kids who can't afford one and where the schools can't provide one. Other would, basically be a device that they, intended to be returned at the end of the school year. The device is given to the kid to keep, then that becomes a personal device. And then whether or not the child has to share that device with someone else in the household. Again, shared, not shared, and unknown on that one. These last two is another example where we taken one question and broken it up into two separate questions. Some of the issues that we did have with the data, we are using this data to do some mapping, and sometimes the physical addresses we were provided for the child were not valid. So again, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to be adding some additional errors and warnings in the 2021-2022 school years when we do find these addresses that cannot be mapped to a valid address. Excuse me. Also, we're going to have some errors and warnings around responses that don't make sense. For example, if their internet access and resident equals no, then their internet access type and the residence can't be something other than none. It can be left blank, but it can't be none. I mean, it can't be something other than none. So you can't say broadband if there is no internet access in the residence. Again, this makes for some problems with the data when we're using it, and the uses we have for this data. Again, the education superhighway maps, that's what I was talking about, taking this data and being able to put it on a map for the districts to utilize. Where we have the bad data, either bad addresses or data that doesn't make sense, it makes those maps less useful to the school district. So trying to get that cleaned up is something that we're going to also be looking at this year. Dean also mentioned the K-12 Bridge to Broadband project, being able to geocode the addresses and look at where broadband is not available to the students. That is another use we have of this data. We also have had requests from the legislature around this information. And we've also had been told that there's going to be some future federal reporting around it. I don't know the specifics of that right now, but those are some of the uses we've had for data equity, and some of the reasons that we've made updates to the questions that we have, and that reasons that we're going to be adding the additional validations in the advisor validation website. So we'll take an opportunity now to go back and look at the questions and answers. I'm going to start by looking for the digital equity questions, and then I'll go back to the others. So I do have one: is the logic being created so if a family states they don't have internet access, that the other questions are automatically completed or no? That's done at the district level. So that is definitely logic that you can put in. If they state they don't have internet access, the other questions around internet service can be provided no. However, just because they don't have internet access doesn't mean they don't have a device. They may have a laptop at home, but don't have the internet access. And we would want to know that information, because that's two different questions we're trying to answer: whether or not the students can access the internet and whether or not the students have a device they can use. So it's not, if they answer no, everything else wouldn't necessarily need to be left blank. The digital equity questions, will they provide it in our SIS, or would you need to add them? I think it depends on how your SIS works. They definitely do need to flow from your SIS into our system in order for the answers, but how they are implemented there is up to your SIS vendor. And yes, we are requiring digital equity for 21-22. That is correct. Now, obviously, we understand that some families may refuse to answer it. That's a different question, but we are requiring it to be collected for all of them. Okay. So let me go back to some of the other questions that were not related to digital equity. Will the new process of identifying students in poverty be used to identify qualifying Title I schools and districts? At this point, I don't have an answer to that, since I think it kind of depends on what legislation is like and also what we find out in this pilot project. Again, we're not changing how we're actually identifying kids for this next school year. We're just working on trying to figure out other methods for doing this identification. So right now, the way for identifying qualifying Title I schools and districts has not changed. And we will still use the free and reduced lunch as the method for identifying students who are economically disadvantaged at this point in time. What we do with the CEP schools right now is we do use whether or not they're direct cert identified. If they are identified through direct certification, then we mark them as free lunch when it comes to including them in subgroups. However, and then if they're not identified through direct certification, they're not included in the subgroups. But again, we may be able to come up with a different method during this pilot project. Okay. Next question, does the assessment rostering process change any of the steps for having to give permissions, roles to each staff members? I honestly don't have an answer for you for that question. I don't know enough about the assessment rostering process. That is a question, though, that we will take back to the NWEA when we're discussing this. So I'd ask someone to please make a note of that so I don't forget, so that we can get that answer back and we can let people know about that. Will SPED and free reduced info be shared with NWEA? My question is that currently being shared with NWEA when you submit your spreadsheets for rostering? If it is not, then they won't be added. We're not specifically adding anything to this rostering that was not already being submitted to them. We are simply providing a different method for doing this rostering. Okay. Where do we find the post-school survey you mentioned in Advisor? So there should be a report. I'm not real sure it is. My guess is it's under the special education reports, but I haven't actually gone out and looked at the report yet. If it's not out there yet, we'll let you know. I think it is out there now. If it isn't out there now, it'll be out there soon. And like I said, I'm pretty sure it's under special education. You will need to have then the special education access in Advisor Validation in order to see that report, though. Okay. Back to student emails. Are you talking about the survey we do stating where the student will be going to college? Now, this is the post-school outcomes is specifically for special education students who have exited special education. They could have exited special education by graduating or getting a certificate, aging out, dropping out. There is a survey that is done 1 year after they exit special education every year, and it's part of the district's performance report. So that is what we're referring to. We're not referring to the survey, the post-school survey, which is, that's the survey where students find out where they're going to college, things like that. And that is information we specifically collect around career ed students. This is information around special education students. Okay. What do we do if a family refuses to answer digital questions? Obviously, some families will refuse. You simply will not be able to submit that data. I don't have an answer. I don't think we will have an error because we do recognize that some families will simply refuse. We may simply have a warning for where you don't have any answers for them. But if you have some answers, but not all of them, that's when you will start getting some errors if the question sets of responses don't make sense. Okay. And Robin wanted to point out for the post-school survey for the 2019-2020 school year, that collection is in the portal. The report I'm referring to is the students that we will be surveyed next year based upon the 2020-2021 exiters. Again, it's only for students who exit their secondary school, so they're only 14 through 21 age students. So it's not all students that are exiting here. Okay. Anybody else have any questions that they want to bring up real quick? Feel free to type them in right now. Okay, post-school outcome. We have our SPED students and SRS. Would it be best to add the email in that system rather than SIS? I don't think that system can submit email addresses and addresses. I think that information has to come from your SIS. The SRS is limited to submitting special education data to us. And even though we're collecting this for special education purposes, it is not in the special education data in the system. Okay. So if you would like some more information, point out where our advisor documentation is. Advisor Data Elements and Calendar. The 21-22 preliminary calendar is out there. We are finishing up the data elements now, and that will be out there soon for the next school year. It also can be helpful for the school districts to go to the vendor resources website. In particular, the changes document is out there. That gives you a real brief overview of what the specific changes are, and you should see everything I had in this presentation in that document. That document is aimed at the vendors, but school districts can also find it helpful. Right now, that is also where the digital equity answers and questions are available. I am planning on making that also available, maybe as an appendix to the data elements document, so that you can also see the questions there. So, but for right now, if you want to take a look at it, it is out in the vendor resources website. We had another question around SPED student personal emails. That is up to they asked, will there be a specific place to put SPED student personal emails, or will it need to be a replacement of where we currently put school domain emails? Our system is capable of collecting more than one email address for a student. And so if your SIS is capable of listing more than one email address, you should be able to list both of them. If your SIS is not capable of doing this, then you would have to replace it. The new SPED exit codes aren't available for year end. That's correct. These changes that I'm putting out here are only for the 21-22 school year. None of these code changes are in 2021. Okay. Are there any other questions? I don't see any. If anybody else has questions, feel free to send them in to the advisorhelp@nebraskacloud.org. We will make this presentation available. I think it's going to be on the conference website. So you will be able to get this information there. But again, also go to that changes document. We'll get you a lot of this information also. So I want to tell you thank you. If you do need to reach me, here is my email address. And hope you have a good lunch. We will be back at 1 o'clock to pick up with Jenny and her team. Thank you very much.
Well, welcome back this afternoon. Hope you were able to step away and have some lunch and take a breathe. This is the third session for today, the final session. We're going to talk about the 2020-21 year-end reporting. And as you know, I'm Jenny Carter. You probably all know me by now. Over the last 20, almost 30, almost 40 years. But today we have the whole help desk team with us. Denise Schuyler and Naomi Colas. And we're going to talk about Advisor, the collections and the due dates, reminders, the resources, and our work days. And staff, we're going to talk about due dates, data uses, and reminders. And also data collections. Everyone's familiar with the consolidated data collection that we call the CDC. And our resources page. We got lots of resources out there to help you.
Hey, Jenny, are you gonna display the presentation for us?
It is. I thought it was. What are you seeing?
Just our faces.
Okay. How about that?
That's lovely. Thank you.
There. Okay.
That works. That works. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. This is our team. And this is what we're going to talk about today. Denise will take the advisor section, and Naomi will do the staff and the data collections and resources. So we'll hand it over to Denise to tell us about advisor.
Thanks. So yes, with the 2020-2021 school year year end upon us, we'll talk about the advisor data reporting. First, we'll talk about the collection due dates. We'll also talk about some reminders and resources and work days. So the advisor year-end collection opened on November 1st. So all the data that you've been submitting since then has been part of your year-end collection. This data is due June 15th, 2021, with an audit window close date of June 30th. Examples of the data that needs to be submitted during this year-end collection are your student attendance, discipline, English learner, student and teacher courses and sections, your enrollment for 2021 completers, end of year transfers, your special education transfers and exiters. So all the data that is available in June is expected to be reported during this year-end collection window. Please do not save anything for the follow-up collection. The follow-up collection for 2020-2021 has some new due dates. These due dates used to coincide with the next year's fall collection, but we needed this data earlier. So we have some new due dates for the 2020-2021 follow-up collection. So it will open on July 1st. That means that on June 30th, that year-end collection window will close, your data will be locked. And on July 1st, you'll start submitting your follow-up data. This data will be due on September 15th, audit window close date of October 2nd. The data we expect to be included in the follow-up collection are your student and teacher courses and section updates from the year end. So any courses that were completed over the summer, your year-end enrollment updates, such as year-end dropouts, summer transfers, summer completers, your special education summer transfers and exiters, students receiving Title I services over the summer. So that follow-up collection, this follow-up collection opening July 1st, is meant only for data that was not available to be reported by June 15th. All other data available in June is expected to be reported during the year-end collection. Some year-end reminders, some things that kind of get overlooked at year-end. We'll just remind you to get your special education students exited. Make sure you're using a valid special education exit. And this is for the year-end collection. So any students that you know are exiting SPED during that year-end collection up until June 15th, June 30th, ensure that they get exited from SPED with a valid exit reason. And if they're also exiting enrollment, exit them from your enrollment as well. Jill did talk a little bit about this in her presentation. There is no crisis indicator for COVID for the 2020-21 school year. Reminders about courses. So all students should have courses associated. Oops, can you back up, Jenny? Nope, the other way. There we go, sorry. All students need to have courses associated. This includes your special education students receiving services and those students in early childhood programs 1 through 5. We do have special education courses available in our course codes and clearing endorsements. This is the website we introduced a while back, a month or so ago, for the course codes and clearing endorsements. You can use this for 2020-2021 as well. You would just change the date back there. Yep, And then you could search for special education courses here as well. You can also download that 300+ page document for the 2020-2021 school year if you haven't already. However, this website is going to be where the course codes and clearing endorsements lookups will be for the next school year, 21-22. The reason we collect course data, it's important because it defines the teacher-student connection. It defines your CTE programs of study offered and your concentrators for a Perkins accountability. We check courses against teacher endorsements, and we also check to ensure that Rule 10 curriculum requirements are being met. So it's important to have your courses all reported and reported correctly. One of your very helpful resources is the advisor validation collection. This is in the NDE portal, and there will be errors and warnings that you would need to review. Errors should be resolved or cleared, warnings resolved if possible. New errors do get added to advisor validation throughout the school year, and some of them do involve other districts. So it is important to continue to review your errors, even if you think you're done. Another district may submit data that affects one of the students or a group of students in your district, and that may cause errors on your end after they report. So make sure you're going back and reviewing all errors, even when you think you're done. We also have verification reports, so not everything can be caught in an error or a warning. We won't know if you're missing a group of students, so a special education student that didn't get reported. So we have verification reports out there that display the data that we have received. At the upcoming advisor workdays, we will have a helpful list of these year-end advisor verification reports available to assist you with verifying that all students are being reported. And I think the help desk feels that the lookups is one of our favorite tools, and we'd like it to be one of yours. The enrollment and student lookup by ID are very useful tools. If you have an error in advisor validation and you look in your student information system and that data is correct, then using the enrollment lookup by ID or the student lookup by ID can show you what we actually received from your student information system. Enrollment lookup by ID is going to show you an entire student's Nebraska public school history, enrollment history. A student lookup by ID will show you the individual records such as demographics, enrollment, special education, free and reduced lunch, those individual records for a particular student in your district for a selected school year. And we also have program lookups such as career education, Rule 18, homeless, early childhood. There's also the student lookup by demographics and a special education lookup. So we have a lot of resources here within the advisor validation resource to help you resolve any errors and data mishaps. And then close to that June 30th date, not June 16th, but close to that June 30th date, we do have available with this link a step through on how to do the district admin advisor validation approval. So once all the errors have been reviewed and the verification reports have been reviewed, and it's almost June 30th, then have your superintendent or district administrator approve them, and this presentation will walk them through it. Another couple of resources. We have our advisor district monthly meetings. These meetings are on the second Wednesday of every month at 10 a.m. And on this website, that link is the Zoom link to join those meetings. We invite anyone to join. You can listen in on updates, questions, provide your input or suggestions. So we certainly advise you to join these meetings with us. We also have the Advisor Resources website. So on this website at the very top, there's a link to that site we were just on. And then we also have on the different accordions there, we have your calendar, the advisor calendar, the data elements document under the data guidance accordion, your course codes and clearing endorsements document and link to the new website. There's a ton of information out here for you to help you with your data reporting. So bookmark this website. And the advisor workdays. We have them scheduled now from between May 27th to June 23rd. The registration link here in this presentation will take you to that registration, and you can sign up for as many of these workdays as you would like to attend. And we will all be there to help you with your year-end reporting. And that's all I have. So if we don't have any questions, we'll carry on to Naomi.
I think the only question that just popped in, Denise, is where can today's slides be downloaded? And I will, or Denise can add a link in here, but eventually after the conference, we'll get all the presentations uploaded to the events page, and y'all can download the slides there and then utilize all these wonderful resources that everyone has prepared. So staff reporting. One of the things that we like to remind everybody is that staff reporting has been open all year long, and districts have been able to enter, update, add, remove staff from that collection all year. But it is formally due on June 15th with an audit window close date of June 30th. And that June 30th date is so key and important because once the collection's closed, we can't make any changes to the data that's within the collection. And there are just so many other places that utilize this information that it's so important that districts are doing kind of a double check and making sure that everything looks good before that June 30th date. So some various data uses that staff reporting kind of links to. Our new educator certification site, Teach, utilizes staff reporting data for the staff experience fields and some other things. There's a link in here that's a helpful link, I think, for people. It's the public certification lookup, where you can go and look up someone's certification status, whether they're currently certified, when it expires. We've gotten some tickets recently where people wanted to know what their NDE staff ID was. And this is a public lookup site, so they can go here and look that up. And then other places that utilize staff reporting, GMS is a big one. I think with the grant reimbursements and like SPED, FRS, that's not in GMS, but it's another big one related to finances, that staff reporting, this is how important it is that it's accurate before that June 30th date, because it's utilized kind of after the fact in various places. And then last but not least, one of the other places is our education directory. This is a public site where anyone can go and look up various things, including staff. And you can do a search by every math teacher in the state. You can look for the administrators at certain ESUs. So let's say you wanted to find all the administrators, all the superintendents for districts within ESU 1. That's something you could do here. And this information is populated from staff reporting. One of the ESUs told me that they actually utilize the education directory to look at other districts' information. So it's another resource for you if you need to look up something else that's reported at another district that you may not have access to in the portal. So to remind you again how important it is that you're reviewing your staff reporting data, there's no formal like approval button for this collection, but it's just a really good reminder to go into staff reporting, kind of review everybody that's reported and make sure everything looks good. Utilizing the NSSRS validation collection is really key here as well. We list any staff errors in this collection, and we also have some verification reports that detail all of your staff data that's currently being reported. So it's really important to visit this collection before the end of the year as well. And then we have a staff resources page where we list the guidance for staff reporting and have some other stuff there, NDE staff ID user guide. We will be uploading the 21-22 staff reporting manual here soon. So look for that to come. We'll send out that in a bulletin announcement when that's ready to go, along with any changes for year over year. So data collections tab in the portal, there is the data collections tab, and the one collection we're going to focus on today that's really key for year-end reporting is the consolidated data collections. This collection is a collection of collections because we love the word collections. And for public districts specifically, there's about 6 collections that are due on June 15th, with again an audit window through June 30th. So a few examples that we want to highlight today. One is the days in session instructional program hours collection. And the reason we're highlighting that is because public districts are required to complete the instructional program hours section of this collection. And our Launch Any site has some specific commissioner's guidance. Yeah, there you go, Jenny. If you click on that hamburger menu there and then go to the commissioner's guidance section, there's some specific instructional hours guidance for districts this year, given the COVID situation. So this is kind of important to review as you're completing that collection. And then the other CDC collection we wanted to highlight was the ESU District System School Information Report. And there's a new indicator within this collection that districts will say whether or not their school is virtual or a combination. And this is meant to be an indicator not based on COVID, but just based on the regular school year. So that's new this spring. We have a CDC resources page as well. And at this page, you can find a calendar, which breaks out the collections, what's due when by system type. So there's Rule 18, there's ESU, non-publics, and of course, publics. And then all of the collections instructions are listed underneath each of their appropriate accordion tab. Most of the CDC collections are probably under general, but we have different types in there. All right, so your addition of the last greatest resource, I think, is our bulletin. And a couple years ago, we came out with a new system. This is our NDE bulletin page. You can visit this page to see the most recent announcements, but they do expire after a certain amount of time and they aren't listed here. So I think what's really important is that everybody subscribe to this. It's not an automatic. You don't automatically get subscribed anymore to the bulletin like you did back in the past when you had a portal account. So you'll go in here, click the envelope icon and enter your first name, last name, email, and then you can actually select what type of items you want to receive. So you can say send me all, and you'll see everything, whether it's related to non-public, public, ESU. But if you unselect that button, you can break it out by category. So if you are a public district, you can select public, and then you'll only receive notifications that are applicable to your system type. The other part that you can kind of do some personalization of your bulletin is how often you want to receive the updates. I think the majority of people have it set up as a weekly digest. So it takes any individual bulletin and collects it all, and then we send you one email on Thursdays. But we at the Help Desk really promote utilizing the right away or daily digest because, and I personally have mine set up as right away. So every time there's a new bulletin announcement, I get an individual email specifying that specific bulletin announcement. You could save, let's say some days we might have 0 bulletins, some days we might have 3, and you can indicate daily digest, which will take all of them and put it into one email for the day, but you have some real options there. So visit the page and update or manage your preferences if need be. And then the last link there that Ginny's clicking on is more information about the NDE Bulletin. It's a presentation that we did at last year's data conference. And then us, the help desk, email advisorhelp@nebraskacloud.org if you have absolutely any question. We love helping you. So that adage of there's no such thing as a dumb question is 100% true. There is no such thing, and we really do enjoy helping you. With the caveat, if there is a question about your student information system, PowerSchool, SRS, it's probably best that you contact them before you contact us, because we don't learn the SIS systems as well, but we can absolutely help you when it comes to advisor, CDC staff, anything related to the portal. We did include some emails in here, but I'm sure you have your SIS contact information if you need to get a hold of them. So questions, I'm not seeing that any have popped in.
Nope.
If you just receive the master's in education. So the master's in education is a principal.
Okay. Well, if you don't have any other questions, you can, where to reach us. Thank you, Denise and Naomi, for sharing that information. This is the end of our conference this year. We thank you for joining us. A survey will be emailed out to you in a day or two, so we'd appreciate your feedback. Anything that you'd like, dislike, you'd want us to add. We take all of your feedback, and we hope that we see you at future webinars and the work days. And here again is our webinar series schedule. They begin in July and go on down. And here's the link where you can get to those monthly webinars. We will try and make those topics timely topics, informative and engaging, and they will be recorded again, like today's session. So all documents you've seen today and these sessions will be recorded. So you will see all of those documents and the recordings from today under this site. And that's where you would register for our future webinars.
Ginny, a question just came in. Are we automatically signed up for future webinar invites, or do we need to sign up for those?
Okay, that's a great question. We would like you to register for each month's webinar. So there's just a quick webinar that just gives us information on how many we expect to attend, if it's a good date. So we would like you to register monthly for these. Well, if we don't have any other questions, we'd like to thank you again for joining us. And we are all here to assist you in any questions you have on any of this reporting and items for the future for next year.
And we'll stick around here a little bit because it does seem like some questions are kind of rolling in a little bit, Ginny. So we can stick around for a little while if you guys keep having questions.
Yep, that's your business unit.
There are a couple out there.
Okay, will a bulletin be sent prior to each webinar? We could mention, we'll address that and see if that's something that we will do. It'd be nice to send a reminder out for you. When will the earlier videos be available? If you're meaning for early this morning, it'll be a couple days before those videos are available, but in just a few days.
And see, that's from Harlan, so that wouldn't be yours anyway.
Okay, well, again, thank you very much. And we look forward to your filling out the survey and seeing your comments. So we will see you in July.